Ellington Park in Ramsgate is the site of a former manor house, long since gone, the grounds of which have been converted into a rather attractive rockery flower bed upon the site of the house, a wide expanse of parkland, and a modern bowling green. The house was owned by one Adam Sprackling, who in 1632 married Catherine Leuchner. It was not a good match, as Sprackling was a wastrel and a drunk, and a gambler with a violent temper. On December the 11th, 1652, Adam Sprackling was at home in a drunken state. When his wife returned later that day, he threatened to beat her, and she, frightened for her life, hid in a cupboard until he left the room. Sprackling is said to have smashed the cupboard door with a pickaxe, but was interrupted when a Mr. Lamming, a neighbour, visited. At this, Sprackling forgot his rage and accompanied Lamming to the kitchen and indulged in some more wine. Catherine used this opportunity to escape from the cupboard and went upstairs. Lamming was sent to fetch old Martin, who lived nearby, and the servant, Ewell, joined them in the kitchen in their drunken excess. The maid at this point took Sprackling's daughter to a safe hiding place in the vast network of tunnels beneath the house. When Catherine came into the kitchen, Sprackling began shouting once more, and picking up a knife he stabbed her in the face. She turned and ran, but just as she put her hand on the door latch to make her escape, he struck with an axe and almost severed her hand off. Martin quickly got some cloth to bind up the bleeding hand, but Sprackling is said to have knocked him aside, and picking up a heavy meat cleaver, he killed his wife. Legend has it that the daughter, becoming afraid of the screaming from the house above, ran towards the church, but took a wrong turning and became hopelessly lost in the cave network. Her body was never found, and local legend also has it that her ghost still haunts the tunnels beneath the park. While Ewell dashed off to get the law, Sprackling attempted to put the blame onto old Martin, claiming he had suffered a mental fit. Lamming at this point was too drunk to move. Sprackling killed 6 dogs and threw their carcasses over his wife's body. He then smeared Martin with blood and attempted to make his escape via a trapdoor in the kitchen to the tunnels beneath the house. However, Sprackling was pursued down the tunnels and into the caves beneath the park, and was eventually caught while hiding behind a stack of barrels in a small cave, while trying to set off gunpowder. He was taken by boat to Sandwich for trial. At the trial, other people came forward to tell of the deeds he had committed. One witness told of an argument between Sprackling and John Simmons in a pub, which ended in Simmons being pinned to the wall by Sprackling's rapier. Another witness had seen Sprackling beaten in a fist fight with one Robert Lister, whereupon Sprackling went to a man called Corselet and paid him to beat up Lister. Finally, it emerged that in 1648, Adam Sprackling and Robert Langley had quarrelled, and as Langley rode away, Sprackling had shot him in the back, thereby killing him. At the end of the trial, the jury took only a short time to find Adam Sprackling guilty of murder, and the judge sentenced him to death. Refusing to see a priest before his execution, Sprackling is said to have put on his long flowing cloak and went to the scaffold. After the hanging, his body was put in a coffin and rowed back to Thanet. His body was carried the final distance to St. Lawrence's Church for burial on a seaweed wagon, which was the only transport available at Cliff's End. Ellington Park was bought by Ramsgate Council in 1892, and the house was demolished. The foundations, however, still exist, and there are a couple of stones with dates still in place, the stones saying 1647 and 1649, and have a cross key symbol in them. The tunnels apparently still exist, linking the house with Ellington Stables, the church, and many other places, including Pegwell Bay. The tunnels are said to adjoin the famous St. Lawrence Caves, which also surface somewhere in the grounds of Ellington Park, although their exact location is unknown. A local story alleges that the apparition of Catherine Sprackling may be seen on the site of the house, running from her husband. I first learned about Ellington Park in Ramsgate in 1994 from someone called Steve, that's a pseudonym, who told an interesting tale about getting drunk one night with a friend called John, another pseudonym, whilst lounging on the old Victorian bandstand. This rather dilapidated structure, once a fine piece of Victorian park architecture, has been daubed with various symbols of the pseudo-occult and general illiterate graffiti scrawls. The bandstand is in an area where a second apparition is said to walk, for there is a local story about a woman who journeyed across the park only to be run down by a horse and cart at the entrance. She is usually described as hooded, in dark-coloured clothing, and seen walking on the path that passes the bandstand towards the park entrance. It was after a number of pints in a local Ramsgate pub that Steve and John purchased a number of cans of beer and made their way into Ellington Park to continue their drinking session while sitting on the old bandstand. At what he assesses to be 12:30, and with his friend dozing fitfully beside him, Steve attested to me that he watched a female figure walk towards him along the path to the bandstand. She was a solid figure in a cloak and hood. Thinking a bit odd, he continued to watch as she walked past the bandstand. As she drew level with him, she stopped in her journey, turned her face to him briefly, which he told me now, sweating as he remembered the encounter, was a skeleton. He said she seemed to smile malevolently at me. Steve was very unclear in his mind exactly what the woman had done then. He was in some state as he remembered the events. She may have disappeared, or turned away and continued along the path. He just didn't remember. What he did remember, though, was waking his friend and beating a very hasty retreat out of the park. At first he was unwilling to go back into the park with me, but after a conversation on the nature of the paranormal, he agreed to show me the exact locations of that evening's events. This vigil took place for a short time on Saturday the 15th of January 1994, between 21:45 and 23:45, after which time Steve refused point blank to stay in the park any longer. Respecting his wishes, we left at that point. The researchers on this occasion were myself, Steve, and my very good friend Paula Barwood, who like me had an interest in the paranormal. This vigil served more as a reconnaissance than an investigation proper, although the 2 hours spent there rewarded us with certain hints that this was an interesting place to investigate on a future occasion. The park, for instance, was noted to have warm and cold spots, very localised areas, which were remarked upon by all present at various times and discovered independently of each other, and the experiences recounted only after the vigil had ended. At the close of this visit, Paula and myself agreed that this was a good location for a second visit of a longer duration, and plans for this were made. Steve, because of his general nervousness, would not be invited on the second vigil. The second visit to the park was made on a very sunny and warm 21st of August evening in 1995. On this occasion there were again 3 researchers, myself, Paula Barwood, and my good friend and long-term paranormal investigating colleague Chester Bradshaw. We set off to Ramsgate armed with notebooks, watches and torches. These were the days before high-tech was affordable to the masses, or at least affordable to us. We arrived about 7:30 in the evening and strolled about for a while to get the feel and see what was happening. There were a surprising number of people around, but then the evening was warm and fine. The initial feelings were that on the main path through the park and to the grass, to the trees, were as though a number of spirit children were playing. These left eddies of energy as they passed, very happy feeling, almost mischievous but playful. This continued for a while. Whenever we encountered one of their energies, it was a whirling sensation of happiness. Everyone on the visit felt these. We loosely stationed ourselves at a point where we could see the bandstand and the flower beds, and made ourselves comfortable. At 9:15 the mood started to change. The children had gone, and this happened in an instant. It was rather like turning out a light. The park suddenly felt brooding. At 21:30 a shiver went down the spine of one of my friends. And remember, it was a warm night, and the feeling of not being wanted became much stronger. At 21:45 we changed position and walked up to the flower beds, which, if you remember, was the site of the manor house, and it started to feel as though something was going to happen. There was an electricity in the air. At 2200 it felt as though we were being watched from one of the trees on the other side of the path. I went off to investigate, and the feeling retreated from me. This was repeated 2 more times. At 22:45 I had just walked from the vigil location to investigate a strange noise, sounding like twigs breaking, but somehow distant and fuzzy sounding, an odd sound that I couldn't really account for. and a strange shadow, when suddenly my companions started waving frantically and beckoning for me to return to them. Upon my return, they told me that as soon as I had gone to investigate the above anomaly, a form had appeared on the path, walking towards the bandstand from the far opening. This figure they both independently described as being grey and misty, slight in build, and an estimated 5'5" in height. This figure, I was informed, had at first approached me, and then simply vanished, only to reappear further down the path, closer to the bandstand. They then watched as it disappeared for good. By now the light had gone. The park was feeling oppressive, and the first drunk of the evening had made his appearance, rolling drunkenly down the path asking for a light for his cigarette. It was clearly time to go.